Hey, and welcome back. Before I get into this very quickly, one of the questions I get is where do I get these models from? And the answer is I just do a search online, and for example, in this case, I searched for a Kratos character model, and I just went through the results. All right. I cannot talk about this asset without mentioning the sculptor, Rafael Grassetti. He's got a post on ArtStation, which is pretty damn popular. I think it's the most liked thing I've seen on ArtStation. It's quite awesome. I'd encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to check it out. Obviously, it's a world-class asset in all aspects. This came out in 2018, so it took full advantage of modern workflows like the use of PBR and Substance Painter. ZBrush obviously is not going anywhere, especially if you're making, high-res assets. Alright, to the numbers. He's around 90,000 triangles, including the beard. You'll notice a very distinct difference in density from the legs and upper body. The guy's got no ass. It's very interesting to see such a polygonal difference going from elbows to hands. I haven't seen this kind of thing before, and I suspect it's to make up for the corrective blend shapes shown on ArtStation. I personally think it's overkill, but I'm sure the internal motive was better to err on the side of caution than, to not have geometry there. And actually on closer inspection, I believe the density here is because they're not using wrinkle maps at all, but instead they're deforming the geometry, which is madness to me. It's all blend shapes here, or morph targets, whatever you want to go for. Over to the face, you can see the topology is more in line with Ellie from The Last of Us Part 2. I suspect Sony has some kind of like base mesh that they use internally that their internal studios just have access to. What's cool about these assets is you can run an unsubdivide and you can have a look at a mesh that is closer to what I believe is a true base mesh, and it's much easier to read, and you can see how they where they define poles and everything like that. It's quite a nice thing to do if you're into that kind of thing. It seems hero assets nowadays are subdivided versions of that, and it's very much what we're looking at right here. And obviously you'd want to do that so you're not having a look at faceted edges of game assets, which isn't fantastic with a hero on a AAA video game. Moving on, mesh splitting for armors. As you might know, God of War gives you the ability to switch armors, and they're split into the following segments: chest, waist, and wrist sections. Just looking at the body, I think the mesh splits are quite sloppy, especially around the arm, this under the arm loop here, or whatever you'd call it. But I guess you'll never see it, being in the armpit. It's quite strange. They very much favored whatever that mesh was and just cut around it and then remapped everything. I personally would have advocated for remaking loops just for the sake of clean geometry, and the shapes could have been retained just given the density here. But hey, that's just my thoughts. I came across a clip from God of War Ragnarök where you can see how they go on to making up these guides, which is really cool. If you're in a studio, if you're thinking about putting a system like this in your own game, I'm sure you'd probably follow something similar. Just work within these boundaries that you define. It's very straightforward kind of ways to communicate mesh segments. A lot of these apply here because God of War Ragnarök, God of War 2018, they were all asset-wise, they're almost one-to-one. I spent some time sifting through the textures here in this model rip, getting a couple of armor sets together, and shit, they look awesome. I really wish they had an art book that they just gave you access to armor sets that you could just cycle through in Blender or Maya or whatever. They're really great to inspect. Moving on to UVs. Kratos, like his Kratos's UVs are average at best. They're mediocre all the way around. Everything's unwrapped in a standard format. The head looks to be prioritizing less seams. The torso is somewhat squared, and the arms are just on there. They're not optimized in any way, which is really sad because I think they need a little more love to get more resolution, and I do think it's noticeable, the lack of resolution in his hands. pants and feet are the same. It's not worth anything more than just a glance. It's, yeah, average. The armors, however, their topology, UVs, and textures are pretty awesome. The way that they standardize them. I suspect they were outsourced simply based on, the consistency of them. And of course that requires a lot of art direction and feedback from the team at Sony. Sony Santa Monica, sorry. I haven't gone through too many armors, but there is some packing order here. Diffuse are RGBA, opacities in alpha. Normals sometimes pack AO into alpha. AOs can also just be standalone. AOs, going back to that Ellie from the Last of Us video, they're all baked by mesh name and not all self-occlusion, which is unfortunate to see. The gloss, they called it gloss, the extra map. It packs gloss in the red channel, metal in the green channel, nothing in blue, which is quite funny, because I think they use DTX texture compression, which noticeably compresses the blue channel, which is why you wouldn't, pack anything there. And the alpha looks like a very heavily high-passed curvature, which is a Photoshop filter. Fun fact, there are 1,800 textures in this folder. Moving on to rigging. I'll just put this video on in the background. I really like the approach they took with rigging, where they have a low poly mesh driving the facial bones. That's very cool to see. I'd love to actually put one of these together myself. The rig itself is super impressive. Very very standard. I don't think anything's like, out of the ordinary. The count is just shy of 1,100 joints at 1,099, including sockets or non-weighted nulls. And there are also 210 facial joints. Big numbers here. You can kind of see the same thing again that you see in the geometry reflected here in the rig. Like, everything's quite basic, especially his leg joints. He's got 2 wrist rotation joints, which is, I'm only used to seeing one of those. So that's pretty high to double it. So yeah, that wraps up my Kratos 2018 model review. And moving on, got a bonus here. If you happen to see one of the shorts, my latest short that I uploaded before teasing this video, you would have seen a request where I was asked to compare the process of an earlier God of War asset, and I could only get my hands on this God of War 3 model. And unfortunately, I can't go into this in any real detail, like this older asset, because I can't remember any developer talks back then. But this was cutting edge back in 2010. I was a couple years into the industry myself. Anecdotally, I remember calling EB Games and asking if they did a midnight launch of God of War 3, and I remember biking down to pick up my copy, getting there, and it was almost empty, that store. Picked up my copy, biked back, and put on God of War 3. So when looking at this model, this was pre-PBR. The game uses an old texturing method and material system based off of Blin Fong shaders, if anyone remembers that. And texturing itself wasn't like it is today. This was most likely baked in XNormal and authored in Photoshop. So there was a lot of hours put into this asset here. I still think it's fantastic. I really like looking at it. Obviously the proportions are really exaggerated, but a lot of things were back in 2010, and I think it fitted the theme of the day. One thing I found really striking is that once I got the model into Blender with Eevee and turned on subsurface, the model looked better than I'd ever seen before, which goes to show you how great you kids have it nowadays. I'm gonna leave it there. Thank you so much for sticking to the very end. Now I'm gonna take a little breather and think about the next model to inspect. See ya.